They can live together or they can die together. This seems to be the rule for those who live in Africa. A continent of many environments requires many varieties of ways to survive. However, most of these ways have one thing in common: family. Family for many people on the continent is a provider of comfort and community. In harsh environments such as conflicts, land nearing infertility, and dangerous workspaces, a family unit ensures that there will be people who continue a community's existence, and or there will be those to provide some form of support for the current members to endure the severe conditions. Through examples such as fertility in Rwanda, childbearing in Niger, or even unorthodox families in Witwatersrand, a family and its continuation plays a key role in the social survival of most African societies. The first example comes from Rwanda. In a 1990 paper called Condoms and Cosmology, Christopher Taylor outlines how HIV, then the more deadly virus, was spreading in Rwanda. This was due to people's refusal to use condoms. One explanation was that Catholicism was dominant in the area, and that certainly was a reason. However, Taylor noted that the more important factor was that in local communities, fluids are meant to flow without interruption, for they are associated with not only human fertility, but the fertility of the land as well. Semen comes out of the man and into the woman, a baby comes from the woman, the baby grows up and the cycle begins again. The king also plays a role, for his fertility and ability to conceive is connected to the earth's ability to grow crops. If the king did not or was unable to have kids, it was seen as a bad omen that would affect the yield of the land, leading to famine and disaster. This type of connection supports the thesis. As a result, condoms are not seen favorably in the communities. Condoms block the semen from creating fertility. When that happens, the earth fails to yield food for the population. This matches with the thesis. Creating family and maintaining families signifies fertility, and that means the enduring existence of the food supply and the society as a whole, despite the risk of contracting HIV. The second example comes from northern Niger. This paper is an account by Susan J. Rasmussen over her decades-long relationship with a Tuareg couple who she identified as Adama, the woman, and Adakor, the man. Over the years, Adama and Adakor lived as semi-nomads in Niger. They are elderly members of their community which sees many adversities such as drought, conflicts, and dislocation. Those are not what bring the couple the greatest hardship. The most significant one is that they have no children. With little money and modern fertility treatments located out of their reach, Adama and Adakor seek spiritual and cosmological reasons and remedies for their infertility. They range from witchcraft, contagion from people like Rasmussen who do not have children, and to an imbalance of hot and cold water in the human body. As the years go by, Adakor and Adama become more active members in their community. Unfortunately, they still have no children. Adakor is receiving derision from his male peers from this apparent failure. Therefore, he decides to marry a second wife, suspecting that Adama is the source of infertility. This does not work to their chagrin. By the end of the paper, Adakor goes in and is diagnosed with a low sperm count. The Tuaregs put heavy emphasis on having children. This might come from their roots as a nomadic society. Such a society may not have a reliable supply of food and water, which would facilitate a steady and predictable population growth. There are two solutions to mitigate this dilemma. One way is to allow people to join the group. This may not be an adequate manner for numbers, for one must be able to convince a full-grown adult who has a generally decent amount of life experience in a certain sedentary lifestyle that a different lifestyle with no sediment is a compelling life to live. The more effective way is to have children. The children will grow up in the nomadic way of life. It will seem comfortable to them, convincing them to stay on the move, conform to the norm of having children, repeating the cycle. Considering the Tuaregs faced natural and/or human disasters, it would make sense that they would try to have multiple children because there is no certainty that they would survive. In the scenario that Rasmussen lays out, Adekor is failing at this obligation to have children. By doing so, he is not upholding his duty to the survival of the group. He may try to show how important he is through other ways. However, he will still receive derision from his male peers. To affirm his status as a man, he goes to whatever lengths he can, which are often consulting with local healers with questionable results. When Adekor finally receives a diagnosis from a professional fertility clinic, it is revealed that he has a low sperm count. He perceives this as having immature sperm. He sees himself as a boy. He is unable to create a family and contribute his share to the strength of the group. To sum it up, Tuareg men can only be seen as full men when they create families to sustain their tribe. The last example involves miners of Witwatersrand in southern Africa. In this region of the continent, and Witwatersrand in particular, mining for minerals is one of, if not the biggest industry. For that reason, many men work in the mines in hopes to make decent money. However, these mines require the men not only to work there, but reside there as well, far away from their homes. To add, there were next to no women in the mines. Even the domestic work for the managers was occupied by men. In effect, the mines were filled with men away from homes, living in cramped conditions, doing dangerous work, and making little money. However, there was one way they would survive: creating families. Most of these men did have families back home, most of whom they sent their earnings. However, being far away, they did not have the ability to facilitate instant and effective communication with their loved ones. It did not help that they also lacked the technology to connect with their families back home. In order to emotionally and psychologically cope, the miners formed families with each other in the form of bukotana, or mine marriages. What would often happen is that the younger miners would become the wives of older veteran miners. The husbands of these relationships would often provide protection and guidance in the mines. They would also offer some of their earnings to help them. In return, the wives would often provide comfort, companionship, and even sex in the form of gangisa, a regional practice between adolescents where the boy would penetrate between the girl's thighs in lieu of traditional sex. At first glance, one might be questioning how Pukotana might contribute to survival, especially because a relationship does not seem to be able to help with the physical conditions of the mine. As stated previously, this was a more mental survival, which can be underrated. Of course, as stated before, most of these men had families, including actual wives and children, but they are so physically distant that they start to become more mentally distant until they do not even exist. This is why miners practice Pukotana. They need immediate companionship. Such a familiar social structure with familiar roles in an unorthodox way. Between performing dangerous work, extracting resources for little pay, these men have a companion to come home to where they can be assured emotional and intimate relations. This also reinforced a sense of status and mobility that kept morale so high that even the employers let Bukotana prosper, even though they would have preferred that the miners be pious Christians who reserved their libidinal urges to mine for more minerals. When the men have such connections, they feel that they would have something instant to return to. Therefore, when they work in the mine, they would have this in mind as they worked. If something were to happen, they would have the basic sense of survival to do whatever it takes to stay alive. Thus, Bukotana relations that start off psychologically and emotionally indirectly lead to physical survival of the miners. In conclusion, social survival of African societies is dependent on the maintaining and continuance of the family. Family provides support and assurance through droughts, conflicts, and dismal labor. They live together so that they do not die together.